Is Angela Reich, and Angela Reich is the author of Shipwreck of Hopes. And Angela and I have something in common, which we just found out right before she came on the show, and that was that both of us were, she is now, and I was in the past, a docent at the Lighthouse on Fire Island. And the thing that we have in common besides that is that it is a place of inspiration and mystery. So, Angela is also a PhD in literature, which really speaks to her writing and how she came about writing this wonderful book. So tell us about your book, Angela.
Well, first, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. So Shipwreck of Hopes contains all of the human drama, the struggles, the successes, the disasters of our lives, and the hope that we have to hold in our hearts. The action sweeps the reader from the lonely Long Island shores across the Atlantic to war-torn Europe, and then back again on the ill-fated ship, the Elizabeth.
So, and it's 19th century, yes?
It's 1848, 1850. So the novel operates on several different levels. It operates on the emotional and psychological journey of the two main characters and their struggles as they have to reconcile their past with the landscapes, the political and social landscapes of the day, of the time period you just mentioned. So therefore, the reader finds himself on the streets of bloody Rome during the Italian Revolution of 1848. That was the political landscape of the time in Europe. The reader finds himself at the Fire Island Lighthouse during the social struggles we were having in this country to try to find money from Congress for so many different things, and in this case for a safety system for the shores of Long Island, which leads to New York Harbor. And then on the social level of the brave and so tough individuals who chose to live on a barrier island at that time. So all of these different operational levels are happening at the same time. So what happens ultimately is that all of this human drama comes together in a collision, literally, of the ship, the Elizabeth, during a wild storm that hits the shore on the deserted barrier island of Fire Island.
I see. And what is the genre of this book, would you say?
This is an historical fiction.
Okay. And why did you choose historical fiction?
Because personally, I don't like to read anything unless I'm learning something.
I agree.
Our time is
that's
right.
the other thing we have
and
in
our
common.
time is precious. And for me, it's an honor if you read my book. It's an honor because you're allowing me into your space. So I owe you truth and verity in action, in human drama, and in historical fact. So to me, if I'm going to spend all the time and energy to write, I want to write something that's worth your while to read.
Oh, I agree wholly. I tried to put history and science in all of my books because I do believe that that's one of the things that writers can do, besides entertaining.
Yes.
Besides entertaining.
And that's the importance, and that's part of the learning that I did on my journey to get the PhD. We are a storytelling people. This is how we negotiate our world and ourselves. So it is the way the human creature operates. So if you think of the earliest stories, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, these are the ways that those cultures pass their stories on to the next generations. And each of those main characters dealt with their own personal ghosts and troubles within their political environments.
Civilizations are defined by their stories.
No question. And the other thing I learned in the research is the more things change, the more they stay the same.
One of my favorite authors is Charles Dickens. And the reason why he's still my favorite author, or one of my favorites, is because all of the social issues that he brought to light in his novels still exist today.
Right.
And the human dramas surrounding them are exactly the same.
Exactly. Yeah. It's fabulous,
to your
actually.
Point.
I love the knowledge of that.
Yeah,
I love the feeling of that.
the continuity of the human condition.
No question.
We never get any better, do we? I'm sorry.
Well, I don't want to go there, but I think that we do.
Okay, hope.
See, again, hope.
Okay. So give us some insight into your research, because you are a researcher, and a novel like this requires a great deal of research. And I'm sure you had some thrilling experiences, as I did doing my research.
Yes, absolutely. So, as a docent at the Fire Island Light, or at any place where you're a docent, you have to do your research and learn the history. And so I set about doing that, and that's where I found the story of the wreck of the Elizabeth. So, a retired English teacher, a researcher, a lover of the beach and of the lighthouse and maritime history, it all came together in that one story. Mm-hmm. Who was aboard this ship but Margaret Fuller, a very famous American writer who was born in Boston and who was in Europe at the time and was aboard the ship Elizabeth when the ship hit the shore. So it turned on all of my, my hot spots: a writer, the beach, the lighthouse, and the history. So now I have all of these many historical avenues to travel down. Just reading about Margaret Fuller was a study in itself.
She's a real person.
Yeah, absolutely. She was very important in her day. Her father was Timothy Fuller. He was a Massachusetts congressman at the time, and he tutored her his Harvard education at a time when women, their education was to sew and to sing and to be pleasant. Here's a young woman with all of the classical education that there was. So she was an anomaly. She had no peers. But her friends were Henry David Thoreau, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Transcendentalist group. She was a wonder, and I could go on forever with her because I have such admiration for her. But that was a whole research area. The other research area is the maritime history. We did not have a safe coast at the time when this country was growing, and all of Europe was heading for New York Harbor. So Long Island beaches are just littered with shipwrecks. So that was another whole study. The people, there was a lot of publicity on this wreck. Even though there were so many, this wreck got a lot of publicity because somebody famous was on the boat. So
Like
it's just
the
like
Titanic.
now, right? If something happens to you and me, nobody cares, but if you're famous, it's all over Twitter and everything. So there were many, many months of front page coverage on this shipwreck, which as a researcher was really good for me because I got a lot of names of people who were involved. And people like to talk about one another, so the locals who were involved in the aftermath of the wreck, who were the only people who were there for days, I was able to find who they were. I was able to do the research. I found their graves on Long Island. I found their stories. I found the census of the time and to see who was who and who went where. So it was great. All these different research areas, which is why it took me 5 years of research to do the book. But can I tell you like one really cool research story?
I hope so.
So I have many of them, but I went to Harvard.
Feel free.
I went to Harvard University to read the Fuller family papers and I made a research appointment. I went up there and I was able to hold in my hand a diary that survived the wreck. It was all waterlogged and messed, but it was Margaret Fuller's writing. I was able to find her letters.
Did she survive? Of course she did.
Oh, I'm not doing any spoilers today.
Oh, okay.
So I have to read the book.
Okay.
So
I will. I did.
Anyway, I was able to find and hold and handle original documentation, which is the way to go in terms of research, because otherwise you're dealing with hearsay. Anyway, I did what I could do there. I came home. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the librarian at Harvard who said to me, we just made an acquisition that I think would be useful for you in your research. So she notified me that they acquired Henry David Thoreau's notes. Now, Henry David Thoreau was her friend. After the wreck, he came down to investigate. He spent 5 days on Fire Island, interviewing all the survivors and writing notes. Now, if you're a Margaret Fuller scholar, you'll know that in every biography, his report is included. It's well known. But what Harvard acquired was not his report, but the notes he used to make the report that had been hidden and buried for all these years.
Something like this, right?
Worse. In fact, I could show you. May
Please.
I? Imagine reading this handwriting.
That's it. Tilt it a little this way. That's it. There you go.
Look at this mess, right? But the opening lines say, I am writing this at the house of Smith Oaks within 1 mile of the wreck. So here now I have his notes of the interviews that he took of all of the survivors, which helped me to confirm my characterizations of those local people.
Yeah, you know, I think that people who, I think people can really appreciate this. Readers can really appreciate the fact that in your book, what you try very hard to do is to create the mood, to create some sense of the characters. And when you're doing your research, to be able to go to some place that enables you to go into that zone, so to speak, really helps you to lend authenticity to your writing. And it's so important to be able to do that.
It is. It actually means, it meant everything to me, because I can tell you that handling the Margaret Fuller documents, handling them just gives you a vibe. And being in the space itself. So we are Long Islanders, very fortunately, so I'm at these beaches. Can I read my first?
Certainly.
Now that we're on the topic, because I tried to establish the vibe of the beach, if you're a beachgoer.
I'll let you know if it's authentic.
This is what I feel when I go. This is where my observation, but I'm not going to read a lot, but it seems
I go to visit
pertinent.
the deer once a week. I do.
There are so many of them.
They're so beautiful.
Hannah Oakes stood alone atop the highest dune. The sun shone bright on her tan skin as the wind swept back her long blonde hair let loose. Arms toned from toil hung idle, legs stood strong and apart, feet firmly set, bare, calloused, upon a new growth of sparse, wild grass. Her cotton frock whipped backward and between her legs, revealing her youthful shape. Here she faced the mighty sea, its jagged surface gleaming like glass in the sun. She remembered a life that seemed so long ago, distant, yet still visceral. An impenetrable shadow remained, though time blurs the edges of memory. This about a young girl unsuspecting, taken by surprise and helpless. So despite the passing of the years and across the miles, haunting memory dreams would not release Hannah. They kept her prisoner, chained. Startled awake many a time from deep slumber by a flash of awareness, then she'd know it again all at once, that once upon another time there was a child who died, who Hannah buried deep and forever. But here, atop this dune, she thought, I am away from that place. This island keeps me captive. This island keeps me safe.
So is Hannah also a real person, Hannah Oakes?
Yeah, well,